Hi everyone. Karla Raines and Rebecca Chopp are here together to talk with you about Differentiation Zone and Differentiated, the book. I'm so grateful to Rebecca for her friendship and for being my first reader this last year as Differentiated came together. And so Rebecca, I'll turn it to you to ask me any question that you'd like to ask.
Oh, thank you, Karla, and thank you for writing this book. It's just a fabulous book, and I have lots of questions, so everybody can get a sense of how important this book is. It's really transformative, and it's going to transform how we invent the future in our institutions, our organizations, our clubs. The uses are so much. But before we get started, I really wanted people to know a bit about you, something about you, because you are so much in this book, and you have had such an amazing journey to get to this process. So tell us a story about yourself.
Oh, how
Tell
fun.
us who you are.
Who am I? Well, I say if you met me as a young woman in my probably junior high years, as we used to say, you would have seen me reading a Nancy Drew mystery, probably spending the entire weekend in my dad's lazy boy chair, just absorbing the story of Nancy Drew, out kind of investigating and finding clues and solving a big mystery. And it's fun to think about that process now because in many ways I've been finding clues and solving a big mystery. And I didn't even know I was out to do that. And I don't think Nancy oftentimes knew she was out solving a mystery either. And so I think that's kind of a fun story to share. I think so much, as you know, Rebecca, about my journey this last decade is really defined by my parallel experience as both an artist and a strategist. And I would not have discovered Differentiation Zone without my artistic practice and all the work that I've been able to do in that realm that informs the way that I think about strategy.
I love that. I love that bringing together. I was a Trixie Belden fan myself, so same kind of thing. And you really are somebody who uses both the arts and science as any good detective would to solve the riddles, the mysteries, to create new things. So let's turn to the book. For 10 years, I've gotten to watch you experiment, test, research. I mean, you've been doing this kind of work for a long time, but in the last 10 years, the time I've known you, it feels like you've really gotten more focused. You've been on a detective journey.
Right.
You really have, and an artistic one to create this book. I've seen you research. I think you've read every book there is, but I've seen you talk to everybody. I've never seen such a connector about their ideas and all. So tell us about how you discovered that click that happened for Differentiation Zone.
Oh, you bet. Well, you know, as a consultant, I have the opportunity to work with a number of different clients, often at the same time, right? So I might be working with the Ritchie School of Engineering and Computer Science at the University of Denver, followed then very quickly by the Children's Museum of Denver at Marsico campus, simultaneous to that, the Logan School for Creative Learning. And all of those stories I tell in the book. And what I have found is that my experience with each client then informs the next client. And so, for example, in 2016, when J.B. Holston, who at the time was the dean of the Ritchie School of Engineering and Computer Science at the University of Denver, said, you know what? It's time to change the narrative from what we do to why we matter. Because J.B. realized the importance of story and storytelling. And I realized how important storytelling was to strategy and planning. Because we couldn't have a successful strategy or plan without the power of story. And so that realization that we had to change the narrative to why we matter and the importance of differentiation and distinction in the marketplace, those were becoming very important topics in higher education and other arenas because competition was so fierce. And so those lessons went with me when I went to the Logan School. And without kind of JB's thinking in my own head, right, that ability to absorb that information, I wouldn't have had the aha I did literally at my colleague Greg's desk for the Logan School, that eureka moment that I talk about in 2018.
You describe the process of differentiation zone as human design through a kind of focus on customer mindset. Those seem to be the three terms: differentiation zone, human design, customer mindset. Can you unpack each of those terms, because they're so key and crucial?
You bet. And we'll actually start with customer mindset, because, realizing that we have to understand what matters to our customer and what matters the most today, especially given the power of the smartphone, because it's really changed everything. And I don't think we understand its significance to strategy quite yet. I do, and I'm really trying to share this with others, because we are at about 73% adoption of smartphones today. 73% in the United States. That's up from 20% in 2010. So at some point in there, we tipped, right, over to this realization that our customer decides our differentiation in our distinction in the marketplace all the time, because the competition is a keyword away, right? And so as we think then about customer mindset, what Differentiation Zone does is we're appreciating the whole person, our customer in their entirety, and we are embedding customer mindset in the strategy process. We're not asking the brand to carry everything with customer. We're realizing that the customer belongs in our strategy and that we need to create a strategy that is customer-centered.
The thing that gets me excited about the book, and when I've worked with you on strategic planning, is a kind of true north. Sometimes when you do strategic plans, you take this piece, you pile it on this piece, you pile it on this piece, and in the end, you hope you can fit that big jigsaw puzzle together that everybody loves. But working with you, there's a kind of true north, a kind of through process. Could you talk about that process, about getting focused on that customer, about keeping to the mission, and about the results? It's a very different kind of process.
My career is really focused on mission-driven and purpose-driven organizations. And I've been able to bring my MBA and my own lived experience as a business owner to that arena. In working in what I think is the best market research firm in the state, I've been involved in focus groups and surveys and demographic studies, and you name it, we've done it. And so I bring that appreciation for all forms of data to the strategy process for mission-driven organizations. And so since we start with mission, I really love to use Peter Drucker's question, which is, what difference do we make in the lives of those we serve? So from the beginning, we think about mission in terms of service, and clarity of customer is essential to answer that question. What we've done through Differentiation Zone is we've connected mission to customer. And we're claiming the important role of our customer as the person whose life we promise to impact through our mission. And that allows us to kind of bucket, if you will, our customer and every other stakeholder that's in our kind of orbit. Because I think often in the strategy process with organizations that are mission-driven, there is a tendency to hear more from stakeholders than there is from the customer. These folks are often in the room when we're doing our strategy, and these folks are over here. And so again, with customer mindset, we're thinking about our organization as if we are the customer. And we're thinking about competition as if we are the customer. And we're thinking about trends like the K-shaped economic recovery as if we are the customer. And we're understanding each of those elements from our customer's point of view. And so clarity of customer and mission right at the start, and so important then to have clarity of customer to identify differentiation in the marketplace. Because if we want to be one of a kind and special, like the Logan School or the Children's Museum or another organization, we want to be one of a kind and special to the customers who matter to us. Because we want to be right at the top of that list, right, when they're considering options.
This is really revolutionary. And I just got to pause with some additional questions here. Because, I didn't ever realize in all the strategic plans I've been a part of, and many of them have been fabulous strategic plans, that I didn't really realize that crucial movement. Because there's, classic strategic planning, you begin with SWOT analysis.
Right.
What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities? What are your threats? But even more important, who are your competition and how can you borrow from them
Right.
to achieve your uniqueness? And in higher ed, it's like every school in the world wants to be like Harvard or
Right.
Yale or Stanford or Chicago or something like that. And that's an impossible quest.
Right.
In the book, you talk about getting rid of those. Can you say a little bit more, not only about why we need to get rid of them, but if we use them, how we can go down a very wrong path?
Oh, you bet. Well, back to my kind of example of the tipping point, those tools, many of them, they're decades old. I mean, the SWOT analysis was created when the body of knowledge lived in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Think about that, right? Everything we knew about the world lived in 25 volumes on your parents' or your grandparents' shelf. And if you're like my parents, you invested in a set and you used it for 10 years, right? 10 years. I mean, now the body of knowledge lasts for what, a minute, right? Expanding all the time. And so I think there's that, it's beginning with the realization of what was the world like and what was it like to do strategic planning, to set a strategy at the time the tools were created. But again, I go back to the tipping point. Those tools were created before we tipped into this customer era, right? We talk about the customer experience all the time in marketing, but we don't bring it to strategy nearly enough. Because if we do embrace a customer mindset, as I am suggesting, and I'm with you, that is the groundbreaking idea in this whole differentiation zone process. That if we embrace the mindset of our customer and we consider choice from their perspective, we're always then going back and saying, as I mentioned earlier, which trends are most important? What's going to drive or shape the choices and actions of my customer? Because if we understand what those are, and I call them shapers and drivers, those are the only forces you really need to pay attention to, because everything else is noise. And those are the forces or the trends or the conditions that your competitors are going to be looking at too. And I think today, kind of along those same lines, we're poorly served if we bucket competitors as direct, indirect, and substitute. And that bucketing is the classic way of thinking about the competition. Well, that schema, if you will, is kind of rooted in the idea that our customers are defined by industry and market. Well, guess what? Your customer doesn't care about your industry. Look at Amazon, right? Amazon would not be where it is today if we limited our thinking as consumers by whether or not they were in an industry that we thought they should be in, right? I mean, industry doesn't really apply. And so today we have competitors kind of catapulting in, if you will, and creating new spaces. We see that all the time in higher education, financial services, and others. And so I think the risk is if we use tools that are decades old and don't consider the realities of today, what I was thinking about even just preparing for our time together is the consumer's already there. If the consumer cares, as they do very deeply today, that every organization needs to have a purpose, an authentic purpose, and deliver on it. If we're not there in our own thinking as leaders of organizations, we're already behind because the consumer is there. And if the consumer cares about digital adoption, if the consumer is online, if the consumer is making choices and trying things they never tried before, which the pandemic has accelerated, right? So many studies are telling us that the pandemic has opened all of our eyes to trying new brands and products and services. That's not going back, right? Even as we're able to engage in person again, that won't go back. And so if we're using tools that are not current, we're not understanding the reality today, whether we're business to business, B2B, or B2C. It doesn't matter because organizations are led by people. human-centered design applies to them too, and they are customers navigating the world in the same way.
It just, again, it's just really revolutionary. And as you say, it's in a revolutionary time.
Mm-hmm.
We're all inventing it. It's just a dramatic turn. I think about higher ed.
Mm-hmm.
For years in my career, many students would go to the highest ranked school they
Right.
could go into, or if they were older students, it would be, the one closest to their home or something. But now,
Yeah.
we're seeing students who could get in to one of the top ranked schools say, no, I want to go, 2 years online,
Yeah.
a year there, I want to put this together, so different. And if we don't understand that, we'll lose the mission. We'll also lose the business.
Exactly.
Right? Because there's a business model implied.
There is a business model, and the business model has to work. And and in that case, the business model is based on students paying full rack rate, right? It's like if we were in a hotel, right?
Right.
What's the rack rate, and
Right.
what's the actual rate
Right.
folks are willing to pay? And I think now that students are realizing kind of what's the value proposition, and again, as you said, what matters to me and what matters most.
Right.
Because, if we think about it, if you're a student and you are passionate about leadership and community impact, so many careers can prepare you for that.
Yeah.
And so many different educational models can give you the kind of the full range of experiences that you need for that, right? It's interesting because I actually thought about getting my PhD over a decade ago, right when this journey started. And first, I joked and I said, well, geez, if I have to do statistics, I work in a market research firm, I can do statistics for free, right? And I've chosen not to, pursue that as my profession. But I also realized differentiation zone wouldn't have been discovered in that environment. It would have been very rigorous, right? I would have had to have a thesis and a premise and a research approach. This happened organically. This happened because I was open to it. Mm-hmm. This happened because I was Nancy Drew and I was discovering clues that I didn't even know were there, right? And so I think that is that ability to be organic and to be real time and to absorb lots of naturally occurring data, to take a lot of information in and be of the moment, I think is especially important today.
Yeah, it's about being creative.
Mm-hmm. It's about being creative. It is. And what I have found is most strategy processes really emphasize the analytical over the creative. Mm-hmm. And what I've tried to do through Differentiation Zone and its 4 steps, from understand to discover, reveal, and then finally to design, is again, we begin with customer mindset right at the beginning and understanding our customer, who they are, that full persona, not the statistics, not the demographics, but the psychographics, right? Who are they as whole people? And how do they think about choice? And which trends are really affecting them? And then we take that then to step 2, to the reveal step, so that we can really understand what matters and what matters most, and then whether or not we're even unique in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. Because I think competitively, to your point, a challenge we have is we might be thinking we're unique, but we're really not, because we're emphasizing elements of our organization that our customer doesn't care about, the zone of indifference, right? And so as we're able to do that, we can then discover that unique intersection, as I described with the Logan School and others in the book, where we find where our uniqueness overlaps with what matters the most to our customer. And from there, we can really define and design our differentiation strategy. That through line's right there, we're current, and we're really thinking about not only today, but 5 or 10 years from now, and what's going to matter then as well.
Okay, you mentioned the zone of indifference.
Mm-hmm.
I both cried and laughed when I read that. I have swum in oceans of the zone of indifference. Explain that concept. Everyone will get it.
Oh, you bet. Well, if any of us are making choices, again, about higher education or buying a car or engaging in another product or service, there are features and attributes that that organization might have that are kind of a yawn, right? Or make us smile. And so what the zone of indifference does is it helps us to kind of capture in a fun way that there are elements of our organization that are unimportant to our customer. They may be essential to our operations, they may be important capabilities, but they will never differentiate us in the marketplace. And it doesn't serve us at all to make those kind of the shining points of our differentiation strategy. So, for example, who's on your board of directors? The history of your organization, tax exempt status, right? We know so many charitable nonprofits have really kind of rested on that as a part of their differentiation. Well, again, your customer doesn't care. If they're out looking for fun things for their family to do on the weekend, and they can take their kids to the Cherry Creek Mall back in the day when they could run through the play equipment or go to the museum or something else, they're not thinking, well, gosh, I'm going to give them more credit because they're a nonprofit than those folks. They just want to do what's fun, right, and what's important to them. And so the zone of indifference is intended to help us categorize essentially kind of internal capabilities that are not strategically differentiating. We honor them, but we set them aside.
So tell me how you do that. I mean, again, I'm very proud of the plans I've worked on with you and the plans I've done. But I would say when I read that, that was an aha moment for me. Because there would be things like, oh, we could never touch this. Oh, the most important thing is this in our strategic plan. And that's connected to all the stakeholders. Right, it was like they each had their sacred item that couldn't. Right. How do you unlodge people from that?
Well, I think you do it carefully with, of course, a lot of love and kind of sassiness, right, over time. But I do think that getting clear about the customer from the beginning, guiding principle number one in Differentiation Zone, in helping stakeholders understand that they're not the customer. They're important, but they are not the focus of the strategy. Their input matters, but not in terms of the focus of the strategy. So as we think then about setting strategy, I think you and I have both seen this, Rebecca. So oftentimes I think back really to the root of the problem is we think a strategy process is about consensus building and when it's really about deciding on the future.
Yeah.
And so I think we kind of get turned around a bit. We think we need to appease and please everybody in order to make a decision about where we're going as an organization. And I think when we do that, we lose sight then about the highly appropriate role of a stakeholder in the process and the very important kind of crucial and unique role of the customer. And so it's very important, again, in that step one of the process of Differentiation Zone is to really help stakeholders understand that they're not the customer.
Right.
They're important, but they're not the customer, which is why I really love having a mission-centered definition of customer, right? Because if our customer is the person whose life we promise to impact through mission delivery, if you can't answer that question about somebody, then they aren't the customer. Everybody else has an important job in serving that customer, right? And so from there, we begin the kind of the gentle nudging, if you will, around clarity of customer and identifying stakeholders. Then when we go through from step 2 to step 3, and step 3 is very specific by design because I found most processes do not emphasize differentiation enough to help us clearly articulate competitive advantage, which is really what we're going after in step 3. But in order to get there, we've got to figure out again what matters to our customer and what doesn't. That helps us get to zone of indifference right from the beginning. Because if it doesn't matter, again, it may be important, but we can't compete on that. And so what's important, right, in terms of operations, in terms of internal capabilities, but it won't differentiate us in the marketplace. Otherwise, you're just another replacement or alternative.
I think that's very helpful. Think about things that get snuck into strategic plans in higher education. So something like pay equity.
Yes.
Really important, crucial, but that's not strategy.
That's not strategy.
So what you're saying is, these things can be very, very important, and you put them in another box
Yes.
or in a box.
Mm-hmm.
It's important, must do, but it's not the strategy. The strategy is what's going to make an impact on your customer. It's what's going to allow you to live out your mission
Exactly.
in a unique way.
And as you set that strategy for the future, and if your differentiation is around gender equity, you bet, right? Right, then
Oh,
that
yeah, that's a
is,
good
right,
point.
because that's a
Yeah.
walk the talk issue. And how do we do that? I think it also goes to kind of my point about, is that the kind of trend, if there's kind of an emerging emphasis around pay equity and gender equity, as there has been, then we're ascertaining, is that going to shape or drive our future? Depending on the organization, it may be a driver, which means we have to then kind of address that as a trend or a force. But you're right. I mean, it really is a matter of kind of deciphering what really is going to tell us where are we going and how we're going to get there. Because otherwise, your point might be a means to that end, but that's not the end that we're going after.
Right. Karla, I want to ask you about your artistic process. You are an amazing artist, and your art is unique. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It's beautiful, it's light, it's bright. I have a piece in my home. It's one of my favorite pieces. Everybody comments on it. It's just so powerful and interesting and complex, but clear as well. So I love that you're an artist, and we share that, of course, in common. Could you talk a little bit about your artistic process and your art, how you do it? And then can you talk about the resonance between your artistic process and your art and your work with Differentiation Zone?
Oh, you bet. Well, for me, the process of becoming an artist and becoming a strategist were really in parallel over about that decade's time. I started off as an artist in the classic canvas and cocktails class, right?
Oh, yeah.
Chardonnay in one hand, right? Paintbrush in the other, right? We're all creating our little fields of aspen trees. And I just loved it so much, and I was looking for a hobby, and so I thought, I'm gonna pursue art. And I love landscapes, but I'm not a good landscape painter. And so I kind of realized over time kind of how my artistic voice was showing up, what I could do that was uniquely me, that brought me great joy. And to let go of what I thought I was supposed to do to be kind of who I really am. And so over time, I started experimenting then with a palette knife. And I then really evolved full-time, if you will, from using a paintbrush to using a palette knife. And a palette knife just provides a different physical experience of moving the paint. And my mom actually also had evolved from using a brush to a palette knife, sculpting the paint, if you will. And I then kind of just happy accident, right, landed on this process of layering different types of paint because they will kind of interact chemically in a way. If you use, for example, like I do latex over a different type of paint. And I just found that if I gave myself just complete permission to kind of get the paint on the canvas and move it around and just see what I could do. And I often had to face, as I think we do in life, disappointment, right, where I wasn't happy with the direction a piece was going in. And it's like, Karla, you're going to have to take it all the way. If you want to be satisfied with this, if you think this hasn't yet achieved its potential, you have to take it further. You got to be that gutsy and just be willing to risk it all. And so for me, that lived experience as an artist was happening simultaneously to my discovering Differentiation Zone and then proving it out in concept. And what I've said is I would not have discovered Differentiation Zone without my experience as an artist. Because that experience gave me the courage and the creativity to keep pushing, and I would take that to strategy and then bring that back to art.
So really, those who do strategy ought to understand it as creativity and art as much as technique. I mean, what's interesting, one thing that's really interesting about you is I think you were trained as an engineer. You work in this phenomenal statistic and data analysis and research firm that really is one of the best I've ever seen. So you've got that evidence, data. You've got one side of the brain here, and then you've got this art, beautiful artistic side on the other. So it's a holistic process. And we really ought to begin to think that we're not technicians of strategy as much as using technical materials like your
Yes.
many layers, in our art of
Yes.
strategy.
Agreed. Well, and I think, creativity has to meet strategy. And I think especially today, as we are coming out of the really tough time of the pandemic, all of us looking at invention and opportunity, the new way forward, right? Into what's next. I believe that today we can't deliver on strategy if we're not creative. Right? Because otherwise we're just one more that's essentially equivalent to somebody else, right? And we need a process that embeds strategy or embeds creativity in strategy. It's not just a matter of a posted activity or a visioning exercise or something like that, right? That's not enough. And so, what I've really endeavored to do is to bring that creative thinking, again, right from the beginning in customer mindset and really setting ourselves out to really understand, deeply appreciate them, and then set the strategy that's going to make a difference for them. And by rethinking things like the competition and bringing in a new way of categorizing the competition, my hope is that each of those different tools, there's still analysis involved for sure, but we are kind of turning the old concept on its head that automatically invites creativity, right? It automatically helps us give up old assumptions like stakeholders or customers as we move that work forward.
I love that. It's really about putting all those layers together and digging into them and creating something utterly unique. So writing the book.
Yes.
I just have to conclude with this question.
Yeah.
Tell me about that process of writing the book. I know we kind of journeyed on it together, you doing all the work, I kind of making comments here and there. But talk about that, because that's your first book, right?
It is
so
my first book.
That's a whole different activity.
It is, and I put it off as long as I could, right? Because I thought, who reads books anymore, right? And then, with the pandemic and the shutdown, Denise, my friend and colleague in this journey as well, said, Karla, this might be the time to write the book, right? This might be the time to write the book. And you had the same advice for me, Karla, this is the time to write the book. And so the big kind of heavy lift for me was I had to unpack, I had to kind of re-engineer what I was intuitively doing, right? What I had figured out how to do over 10 years, right? I had to kind of re-engineer that and explain it in a way through stories and examples so it could resonate, click, connect with my reader without my being there. Right? Because it's different in consulting because you're present. You help interpret, you help answer, you can make key points. But when you're the author and the book is static, right, the book has to carry all those messages by itself. And in this case, it has to be able to powerfully convey why customer mindset is so essential today and what you can achieve when you embrace it. And I talk about that as, adopting again like a new tool. With that. And so, over 4, 5, 6 months, I devoted, at least one day a week to writing. Some chapters were easy. Some put up a fight, as I say. Chapter 7, which has a big job in the book, I wrote the story, the opening story for that chapter, 5 or 6 or 7 times, because I had to get it right. I had to get it right. And so it was really fun to think about which of my kind of modern day exemplars, as I think of them, could most, I think, eloquently convey the story and the lessons in each chapter. The first part of the book, which is all about embracing your customer mindset, lays out the 6 guiding principles of Differentiation Zone. And each of those principles, like Zone of Indifference, we needed the story to make the case, and then we could lay out the essential learnings from there. Section 2 of the book is about understanding that the essence of strategy is choice and lays out the 4-step process. And again, each of those chapters, because of the unique nature of the process in that particular step, the exemplar really needed to bring that process to life and point that very clear through line for the reader. And so it was fun, but how it goes, it gets hard, it gets harder along the way, right? And you have to rework some of the early things. And the thing I kept going back to was I thought, Karla, this is not a vanity project, right? This is not, well, geez, you're at this point in your career and you write a book and, you can get some talks out of this or whatnot, and then you're done. I've invented something important in my field, and I'm really excited about that. And I want to make as much of a difference as I can with purpose-driven organizations. So it means going beyond just writing it up for my clients. It's how do I then share this with other consultants and with executives that are really looking for that new way forward to differentiate themselves in the marketplace.
Well, I think the book is incredibly clearly done. I love the use of the stories, and your way of telling a story, you're just there, you're already experiencing it. But there's also these principles, they're pullouts. The book is designed technically from a design perspective in a human-centered way. I mean, it's easy to read, and I think it'll be easy to apply. So let me just congratulate you.
Thank you.
And thank you for writing this book. And then you want to just conclude by just telling us what's next?
What happens
now
next?
We're going to buy this book. We're going to know this process.
And
Now what are
happens-
you working on?
What are we working on? Well, one of my kind of long-held dreams has been to host and curate a digital learning community for strategy. It's something that I envisioned 10 years ago. I was a bit too early to the market with not quite the right idea. And, now we're in this subscription-based era. Everybody's online all the time. And I realize that, if you're like me, if I were myself 10 years ago, it sure would have been nice to have had other resources beyond reading an article or a book on my own. And so we're launching for Differentiation Zone a strategy studio, subscription-based model. It'll have both a free component and a paid membership. And the idea then is for me to make myself available, again, to other consultants who are wanting to upskill and executives as well, who want to deeply embrace this process, learn with me. We'll host author-led book discussions and all kinds of things. And then from there, we are creating, I think it'll be the first of its kind, a digital strategy studio space for organizations and consultants to run their strategy process.
Nice.
So then everything that they need around Differentiation Zone will live online.
That's just fabulous. So again, Karla, thank you. I have learned a lot more about the book, and I'm going to look forward to reading it again.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you so much.